All right, we're going to apply Vendler's questions to this model poem today. Maggie and Millie and Molly and May by E. Cummings. A very unconventional poet, doesn't like to follow traditional grammar or punctuation or capitalization. So these are not typos in this poem that you have. Maggie and Millie and Molly and May went down to the beach to play one day, and Maggie discovered a shell that sang so sweetly she couldn't remember her troubles, and Millie befriended a stranded star whose rays 5 languid fingers were, and Molly was chased by a horrible thing which raced sideways while blowing bubbles, and May came home with a smooth round stone as small as a world and as large as a loan. For whatever we lose, like a you or a me, it's always ourselves we find in the sea. So the first couple of steps of Vendler's questions are kind of similar to TP Cast, where you're asking what is the literal meaning, what's setting the poem in motion. Really, we just see 4 girls, they're going to play at the beach and they find different items. And what happened to kind of set this poem in motion? You kind of get a little bit of context. You can draw some inferences for at least Maggie. Is she having troubles since it talks about she can't remember them now? Millie, does she not have any friends since she's befriending a stranded star? Molly, I don't know. She just seems like trouble because she's being chased by a horrible thing. So I'm wondering just what she's gotten herself into. And May, does she feel alone since now she's identifying with this smooth round stone that's all alone? The next couple of questions, you are, in this first one, division into parts, will really help for the rest of the questions because you will look at some of the chunks individually, but you're really looking at what are the smaller chunks to help break up meaning. Is the first chunk here is really just setting context. So that's important to kind of set apart. Stanzas 2 through 5, we get to see individual experiences explored. So all of those are unique in themselves. I would divide those up. And then stanza 6 is its own chunk. It's really that generalization, right? Since it's drawing it out to the general public in the end to relate to everyone. Climax, you're asking what's the most intense part? And this is so important in poetry because it may be right around that major shift of the poem. So this is also important to consider. In this one, I would say stanza 4 is really our climax. It's the most intense because of the action that's going on. She's being chased. The horrible thing is racing sideways. It's blowing bubbles. A lot of physical action here. Also hints at fear and confusion since she's being chased and it's a horrible thing. Not quite sure what exactly this creature is. I don't know of any that would be like that, racing sideways and blowing bubbles, but it's one kind of makes me wonder, like, why doesn't Molly experience a resolution here? It just seems like she's left being chased. The next part is going back to those chunks because you're looking at how does one part differ from the others. So in stanza 1, that stands out on its own because all 4 are mentioned. Stanza 2, we get to see personification, right, of that shell that sang. Stanza 3, we get to see the metaphor of the rays that are fingers. Stanza 5, or sorry, I skipped stanza 4. Stanza 4, there's no rhyme or rhythm here. The others might have a little bit of slant rhyme here, right? But, and this one has true rhyme, most resolution possibly. This one does not have rhyme, right? No resolution. And it breaks the rhythm with an extra word here. Then stanza 5, we see 2 similes that show how she associates with that stone. And then stanza 6, first person point of view. That part is so unique because it is generalized and it is relating to everyone in the public. The next part is tone skeleton. This would be also another great way to organize your essay, really looking at the dynamic curve of emotion, what causes those shifts in emotion. And you're actually looking for more than just 1 or 2 emotions. You're trying to break it down microscopically and look for all the little tone shifts throughout. So in stanza 2, I saw happiness, right? That she couldn't remember her troubles, this peaceful feeling. Stanza 3, some pity, because it's a stranded star. It's languid, so it's kind of weak and limp. Fear, we talked about in this one. And then belonging in this one, since she's coming home with it. And then clarity in the last stanza. So when I'm thinking about this tone skeleton, I'm starting to wonder, could these emotions that they each experience just be different ways that people respond to their internal or even external conflicts in the case of Molly? So does that have anything to do with the process of finding yourself? Maybe we're getting a little bit more here into the implied theme other than just that we find ourselves. Moving on, games with the content genre, sometimes good to consider, especially if there's some irony or some interesting changes that could start to help you question why. So in this one, it is lyrical, sound a little bit like a childhood rhyme, right? But there are points where it's irregular rhyme and rhythm, and we have to stop and ask why for Molly. Narrative poem, it tells a story, but what's interesting is it tells multiple stories, lots of different points of view. So that is different than the typical storyline where you're following one character's conflict mostly. So I'm wondering here if then we have lots of different storylines. Is the author trying to show us that each person has a different way of finding oneself, a different experience of what that looks like, but then we all end up finding oneself? Tone, you're looking at tone again, yes, because you have to read it out loud and kind of discover what is the author's tone in this part. So interesting to pick out some things like here in the end, for whatever we lose, it's this explanation or drawing this conclusion for the audience. So I found it kind of to be a little bit more teacher-like or instructional. That's a good word to use, is didactic. It's always ourself we find in the sea, so just that reassuring tone for the audience. And then to play one day, that clarification, and then even down here we see another clarification. That just sounds a little bit more like you're trying to teach them a lesson or explain something in an instructional way. Agency, you're looking at who is the main agent or subject of action, and in this one we see lots of different subjects of the action. So really important to think about who's doing what in here, and again I think that can help us understand that it's relating to many different readers, and it's considering all the different types of conflicts and emotional reactions. Did any of you really relate to Maggie at the beach, where she's finding just this peace and happiness because she's relaxing on the beach possibly? Anyone kind of relate with Molly? You hate the beach, you're being chased by a horrible thing, everything about it is awful. I'm thinking of my son and how he might relate with Millie, because when we went to the beach this summer, he was finding a little group of friends to play in the sand with. So all of these different characters in this poem might help different readers understand or relate based on their experience of finding themselves. For Roads Not Taken, this is really important to consider to help you start to see the reasoning behind the structure. So you're asking why these pieces in this order. For the first stanza, it's a small experience, right? But it ends up bringing us to a larger truth that we can all understand. And I think the middle parts are showing us the progression and how we actually get there. Conflict resolution, right? Look at the yellow and green. We see some people missing something that they find. That helps us understand what he's talking about here in these last couple lines. So he's really helping us to see, by putting it in this order, that it's really a matter of the individual's experience and how they find themselves. Speech act is really looking at the manner of expression, or what is the action of the speech that is given. Here we see an observation with a clarification. Here we see in all of these lines that there's an observation in the first line with description in the second. And then in stanza 6, I would say that this one is that speech act of generalization. It could also be a speech act of reassurance, like I mentioned before. So you're thinking about the manner of expression. I have a handout with a lot of the different speech acts that I'll share with you. Outer and inner structural parts, if you take a look at your handout, there are a lot of different ways that you could approach this. Some of them for the inner structural parts, you're looking at things like punctuation. For outer structural parts, you could be looking at the changes in agency or even the point of view. So in this one, I thought it was interesting to look at the punctuation because stanzas 2 and 3, so Maggie and Millie, are actually connected with a semicolon. Is their experience kind of similar in a way? We see happiness from sadness in this one. We see this personal connection in this one, and it's a little bit more relational. So are these the more positive experiences that people might have? Stanzas 4 and 5, we see connected with that period there. We see conflict right here. No resolution for Molly, but definitely resolution mostly as the focus here for May since she's coming home with it. We also see something lost and something found, right? So looking at the way these are structured and the way that these are kind of grouped together might help you understand a little bit more. Point of view change in the last part could also be an emphasis for the outer structural parts. Lastly, we come to imagination. So we ask ourselves, what has that poet invented that is striking or memorable? I think going through all of these questions helped me to see that the greater lesson is that the process of finding your identity is messy, emotional at times, could be positive, could be negative, could be full of internal or external conflict. In this one, each person identifies with something different based on their experiences and their worldview, right? We see that shell that sang so sweetly for Maggie. What could that be symbolic of for her? We see the stranded star for Millie. Maybe that shows us something about that type of personality. May coming home with a smooth round stone. Molly just still getting into trouble and no resolution for her. So each person is going to find something that they identify with that might lead them to finding themselves or understanding themselves. Also, learning about yourself is not really about others. Think about how isolated these 4 girls are. We don't get to see them interact at all. It's all about their own self-discovery. So maybe the author is also mentioning that because for whatever we lose, it's always ourselves we find in the sea. Not an understanding of others, but an understanding of ourselves. So as you think about these 13 questions that Vendler highlights for us, you're going to apply them to blackberry picking and again with another poem in the coming days. So really think about how this might help you uncover some patterns that you didn't notice in that first read through or first annotation with TP Cast. What are some other things that you can pick out and explore? And I think you'll see too that you could even use these different questions to structure your essay or to give you a new approach to writing about the poem in a fluid way and not just isolating literary elements and kind of talking about those separately, but how can you work all this stuff together to show the patterns that the author develops.